Hello and welcome to Get Started. I'm Merlin, and in this video we're going to paint the unique details on our Outrider Sergeant. So this includes the flesh, the exhaust coverings, as well as the bike controls. We'll also be painting our ruins up to a decent tabletop standard. We'll learn a few new weathering techniques, as well as picking out unique details that aren't the same on the pipes. If you haven't already, go back and paint the Outriders just as we did in video 1 for the Crimson Fists. Then, for the ruins, if you haven't painted them like video 3, don't worry, there's quite a few unique aesthetic details, so I'll be covering a quick basic paint job on the ruins before we progress with the new advanced techniques. Right then, if you're ready, I'll see you at the paint desk. Okay, we're ready to begin painting the details on our Outrider Sergeant. As most of these details are fairly small, we'll be using a medium layer brush for added control. So the first colour we're going to need is Corvus Black, and for this we're going to be picking out the tyres on the bike. This will help give them a bit of a different finish if compared to areas we paint with Abaddon Black. So we'll shake our paint up. We'll get our medium layer brush, load up some of the Corvus Black on our palette, thin it down with a touch of water, a little bit more, and onto the model. So what we're going to do is paint this all over the tyres, being careful around the areas we've already completed, like the silver rims and the base. As we're going over Chaos Black, it should only take a good one layer to get a solid coat of Corvus Black. But if you do see any of the undercoat paints like the silvers showing through, just come back in with a second coat. Okay, with our tyres drying, we can now move on to the next colour. So for this, we're going to paint the skin, and we'll want to use Bugman's Glow. This gives the skin a nice rugged flesh colour, perfect for the Space Marines. So again, we'll get a medium layer brush, small bit of paint on the palette, water it down with a couple of brushfuls of water. As this is going over black, we might need a couple of layers, but it is still a pretty strong colour, so hopefully we won't need too many. So like I said, we're just going to pick out his head, just being careful around the pieces of armour we've already painted. There we go, almost done. That looks pretty good for just one layer, so we can easily, hopefully, leave it there. I'll see what it looks like after it's dried, and if need be, we can come back to it. Next up, we'll pick out the left and right fist of our Crimson Fist Assault Outrider Sergeant with corn red. We'll also pick out the handlebars and the grip on the chainsword. So, unique to the Crimson Fists, they donate their veterans, instead of the white markings of normal chapters with a double red fist. So we'll have to pick that out, as well as any other small red details with the corn red. So luckily the purity seal will also be red, so if we repaint over it, it won't matter too much. So we'll get the end of the gauntlet as well, and his hand. As I said, we'll also pick out the handlebars here, do the grip on those, as well as the grip on his chainsword. Next up is an optional stage, but if like me you've left the riders separate from the bikes, we can easily access the saddle, so we'll pick that out with Mournfang Brown. So again, medium layer brush. And so we got the front of the saddle just here, and it goes all the way back to the top of the bike, like so. Don't forget to reach down and get the side of the saddle where it wraps down over the actual engine of the bike. And you should take about 2 layers to get a solid brown. The only colour we got left to apply now is Moonlord Brass, and that's going to go over the casings on the exhausts, just to help them stand out a bit more against the side of the bike and the rest of the actual exhausts. So don't forget to change your water after you do this stage, as this is the only metallic we are actually using. But all we're doing is coating over the actual casing of the exhaust, getting it into the recesses as well. Just being careful around the silver and the blue that we've already painted. Just take your time. You might need to go back with a second coat as it is a bit thin going over the black. Once you're done, we can move on to the final stage for our bikes. Okay, the last areas we need to do, or the last thing we need to do, is to give all those areas a shade with non-oil to tie it in with the rest of our scheme. So we'll go to our medium shade brush here, as we don't need too much control, but we just want to make sure you get enough of the paint on our brush. A bit more on the palette, that should do. So, as you can tell, I've got a few areas of blue that I've had to touch up, so we'll paint those in with the non-oil. I'll also paint over the exhausts. I'll do a thin layer over the flesh, not too heavy, just making sure it gets in the recesses plenty. And then over any of the red areas, as well as the seat. Don't worry if you can't reach all the areas, just get the areas that you can see. And don't forget to do the tyres as well, helping that Corvus black just to stand out a little bit more. Okay, I've removed the rider from the bike for these final stages, and all we're going to do is pick out the buttons and the screen on the console with a trio of paints. So we'll start with Caliban Green. This is going to go on the screen and the triangle buttons. Not going to need a lot, as there's only small areas we need to cover. Just get a nice neat covering with the Caliban Green on the screen and the buttons. So the triangle ones at the top here. Triangle green for going fast, and we'll do the red buttons for stopping. Next we'll pick out the round buttons with Mephisto red. Again, just need the smallest amount on a brush, touch of water. So we got the red button here for the power on and off. And we got one red button on each of the handlebars for the stop. Or the brakes, should I say. And finally we'll pick out those square buttons with Macragge blue. Just to help break up that console. There we go. We can leave that like that. We don't even need to shade it. The colours are perfect just the way they are. So next we can move on to our ruins. Okay, we're ready to begin painting our ruins. As you can see here, I've got the flooring and the actual ruin itself in two separate sub-assemblies. This is just to make painting all the details on the ruins a lot easier, and also helps to make painting the flooring a lot better, so we can prime it with lead belcher like I have done here. So we'll set this off to the side for a moment and we'll focus on the main building itself. Okay, the first paint we're going to need is a contrast paint. Skeleton Horde. I've actually thinned this down already with contrast medium at a 3:1 ratio. So that's 3 parts contrast medium to 1 part Skeleton Horde. This gives a nice light colour and won't be too overpowering. So, shake the pot just to make sure it's got a good mix. And to apply this, I'm going to be using my large shade brush that I've got. This just helps control the paint, get a lot on at once. So we'll get a good puddle on our palette. And then on our ruins, we just want to make sure we go all over, working it into the crevices. Don't matter about areas that won't be this afterwards, we can easily cover over with colours later on. With our Skeleton Horde nicely dried, we can start picking out some of the other details. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to use corn red, and that's to pick out the door and the windows and this large energy canister here. So, these are fairly large areas, so I'll use a standard brush, which has nice wide range, but also control. So just thin it down ever so slightly. Then making sure we ain't got too much and we got a nice tip to our brush. You can bring it in and start applying it. So like I said, we got the door. We just need to be careful along the outside so we don't get any on the skeleton horde that's dried. Don't worry about painting the edges, just paint the top bits. The shading will finish that off later on. Take your time around the edging. Then when you're on the inside of the actual door itself, you can take a little less care. So make sure you work the paint into all the recesses and cover all the individual panels. Then on our generator here, we'll just pick that out with the corn red. Just being careful along the edging here where we meet the skeleton horde. And the final area we've got to cover is the window here. Don't have to worry too much about being careful on the inside there, but just want to be careful bringing it down till it comes in line, like so. You want to make sure you pick out all the struts on the window, and don't forget to get on the inside as well. With our corn red painted, we can start to focus on the next area. So next we're going to pick out the cog mechanicum, and we'll start off with Corax white and paint the white half. So this is the left half of the skull and the right half of the cog. So as these areas are fairly small in detail, we'll move to our medium layer brush. And luckily for me, my Corax white is pretty runny. Just a tiny touch of water, just to help thin it down. So like I said, we got this half of the skull to paint. And then this half of the cog. Good idea to draw a line down to the bottom and from the bottom to the top, so we map out our area. And then just fill it in with the Corax white. With our white dry, we can pick out the opposite sides with Corvus black, still using our medium layer brush. Get some Corvus black on the palette and thin it down with a good bit of water. And so onto our cog, painting its left hand side and then the right hand side of the skull. Don't forget to get the teeth at the bottom. If you make any mistakes, just touch up with some Corax white once it's dry. With those three areas now painted, we can apply a shade with Nuln Oil. The reason we're doing these areas now is so that when our next stage, we're going to cover them with a dry brush. It means we won't have to repaint any areas that we're painting metal or black later on. So we'll load up our brush, gathering a puddle onto our palette. And we'll apply this all over the black and the white we've just painted. As well as all the red details. As you can see, our non-oil wash has dried, and it really helps those details pop out. I've done both sides. So now we're ready to bring in our next stage. And for that, we're going to give an all-over dry brush with Corax White. This will help brighten up the model a bit and add a sort of dusting to the areas we've just painted. So, as with all dry brushes, we still need to shake our paint, but we want to make sure we have very little left on the brush. Because we're covering a large area, I've got myself a large dry brush here. So, we'll bring in our tissue and work the paint into the bristles, like so. Moving it around just so we make sure we get off most of that pigment. Then we can bring it onto our model. So now we can bring in our dry brush and we'll flick it backwards and forwards over the areas we painted so it picks up on the sharpest edges. This will be very subtle on the areas we've painted with the skeleton horde. That's fine, that's what we're trying to get. Like I said, we want very little in the way of paint left when it comes to the cog mechanicus. We don't want to overpower the black, but we want to pick out just the raised areas. So do this all over the model, then leave it for about 5 minutes just to make sure that paint is fully dried in. And then we can start picking out all our finer details. Now we've done the dry brush, we can start picking out all the metallic areas. So this is all the pipes, light fittings, vents, etc. that are around the model. And for that, we'll just give it a coat of Leadbelcher. As a lot of this is going to be fine detail, we will use our medium layer brush. But for larger areas, have a standard brush on hand. And also don't forget to change your water afterwards, as we don't want to put metallic flakes into our matte paints. But we'll go ahead and load up our palette in the usual manner. A little bit of water, not too much for metallic paints. A little bit more paint, I think. Then onto our model. So onto the terrain, we're going to be picking out all these different pipes scattered around the model. Areas like these vents and grills. Any identification plates, like on the generator here and the door. We've got this control panel here. Avoid the skull, but pick out the control panel itself. The grate inside the door window there. We've got the light just above the door. All the wires in at the back of the cog mechanicus. Just be careful around the areas we finished. And don't forget the bionic eye here. I'll pick that out. Okay then, we've picked out all the silver detail, and as you can see, it helps complete the model. So now we can continue picking out all the smaller details. And the next paint we'll use is Corvus Black again, and this time I'm going to pick out all the different types of ribbed pipe. We'll paint those with the Corvus Black. So again, we'll use a medium layer brush just to have added control. A bit of water on my palette already, so that's made it easier for mixing the paint. Bringing it onto our model, just want to pick out these large ribbed pipes here running all the way down. The front of the building, and then on the other side, inside wall, we've got these ribbed pipes here, and these ones just up here to pick out. With the Corvus Black pipes picked out, we can now focus on some of the smaller cables. And we're going to be using a variety of colours. So I've got Warp Zone Glow and Euro Yellow, Laytock Blue and Mephiston Red. So these are going to be perfect for picking out all the different cables. And we can paint them any which way you want. There's no real say as to what colours should be painted which. So I'll just show you a few examples, and you can do the rest as you'd like. So I'll start with Uriel Yellow, and I'm going to use this one mainly on the bunched up pipes and cables. So this is a layer paint, and we'll go over the Wraithbone and Skeleton Horde quite nicely. So I just want a touch of water just to thin it down. And the pipes I'm talking about are these ones on the inside here, or cables, not pipes. So I'm just going to pick out all these pipes, cables that are bunched up, trying to avoid the silver details we've already done. And you can also pick out a few other cables. So you got some of the ones coming from the control box here, so we'll pick these out. Maybe a couple of these up here, pick them out in the yellow. Then we're going to do the same with Warpstone Glow. So again, picking out a variety of different cables. All over the model. And again, we'll do the same, this time with a Laytock Blue. And finally, the last set of wires we'll pick out with Mephiston Red. Also, at the same time, we'll use Mephiston Red to pick out the eye on the Cog Mechanicum there, as well as the little lens on the Bionic Eye there, and the control panel buttons as well. And now we've picked out all those colours, we can give them all a shade of Nuln Oil just to help shade them down and add a little bit more definition. So we don't need to be worrying about being too neat, as it all helps to add to the emphasis of it being a dirtied and abandoned facility. But you don't want to add the wash too heavy. Just try to focus it on the areas we've just recently painted. If you get any on the already painted areas, it doesn't matter too much. It adds to the worn effect all in the end. Just take your time going around the model. Then when we're finished, all what's left to do is add our weathering detail. With our known oil dry, we can see that picked out the details nicely. So now we can start focusing more on the weathering. So the first paint we'll need is Agrax Earthshade. This is to give a layer at the top and bottom of the ruins to show, build up a dirt, water and grime, etc. So we'll use our medium shade brush, and we just want to apply this straight to the model. So we want to paint all along the bottom here, just to show where the dirt has been building up over the years. And then we'll do the same at the top, making sure we drag the paint upwards. Like so. You can focus it a bit more heavier around areas where there's damage. And where more water would pool, like in the recesses here in the corners. And don't forget to do the opposite side as well. So there we have it. The Agrax Earthshade has dried. As you can see, it's given us that nice sort of weathered effect at the bottom and top of our buildings. So now we can move on to the new technique that I was going to tell you about. So like I said, for this we're going to want a piece of sponge, and as you can see I've torn up the end a bit just to make it look a little irregular. I've also got a piece of newspaper, and the paint we're going to need is Rhinox hide. So this is a nice dark brown, very leathery brown. What we're going to do is we're going to stipple this all over the areas of the building where there's damage. So it's along the edges, along the top, and in the areas in between. So what we'll do is we'll dip the sponge into the Rhinox hide like so. Then on our piece of newspaper, we'll dab it off, working it into the sponge, and as you can see when we move it around, it's leaving off less and less of the paint. So next onto our model, I want to stab this in a downward motion so that it picks up along the edges. Like so. Then we can bring it down just a little ways to show more dirt and damage. We can do it along the bottom as well. And along the side here where the ruined building has been blasted away, and we can always bring it down in patches just to show our building has been battered by the elements. There we have our first weathering technique. So next we're going to be looking at the flooring, which I'll teach you a couple more techniques. So here we have our flooring section, and as you can see I've already sprayed it and given it a once over with lead belcher. But the first thing you want to do is to take our large shade brush and give it an overall coating with Nuln Oil, perfect for all this metal detail. And hopefully I'll have just enough left over for this piece. So I want to make sure we work it into all the recessed details. Adding extra definition and picking out all that detail. Okay, for our next stage, we need to make our own wash. So we're going to use Moonlord Brown, and we're going to water it down quite heavily, just with some water. So we got a nice wash consistency. So I'll take my medium shade brush here, we'll just get a good dollop of the Moonlord Brown onto my palette. Then we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 brushfuls, mix it in. Let's try it out. Yes, that looks fine. So what we're going to do is onto our flooring, we're going to apply this roughly along the damaged areas, like so. Just applying it, then working it into any of the recesses where there's damage. And also anywhere where water would pool, like in the vent there, against the corner of the building. So we'll do a little triangle just there. Yeah. We'll leave that to dry, and then we can move on to our next stage. With the Moonlord Brown now nicely dried or drying, we can move on to the next techniques, which are going back to the stippling, and this time we're going to use Troll's Lair Orange. So this will give a nice rusted effect over the brown. So as before, gather some up onto our sponge, work it off onto some newspaper. And then we want to focus this onto the areas where the Moonlord Brown is. Build it up gradually, just so it's not too overpowering. And finally we're going to do the same, this time with Stormhouse Silver, just so we can pick out some chips and flicks, showing where the rust has been worn off. And there we have our chipped flooring, all nicely finished. What we can also do with the Stormhouse Silver is bring in our larger ruin, and we'll dab this on areas like the doors, this boiler. You know, it looks really nice. So there we have it. That is our ruins painted. And now we're ready to fight over them in our next battle. So here we have the completed larger ruin. As you can see, I've used all the same methods to bring this model up to the same standard. Here you can just see all the detail underneath. Here's our smaller ruin. I've slotted the floor in place. I've had to clean off the top and bottom of the canal there so that the flooring will fit in flush. But it sits in nicely, and I can easily break these down into smaller sub-assemblies and build up some different types of ruins. And finally, here are the two smaller ruins that go on the corners of each of the larger ones. So I painted these up just in the same method as I've done with the other two ruins. But as they are smaller and not as detailed, I didn't have to put in as much effort, but they still look really good. There you have it, simple and effective ways of weathering your terrain. You can go back and apply these techniques to your pipes to bring them up to a much more detailed standard. That's it for this episode of Get Started. I hope you found these tutorials useful. We'll use these and more in future videos to bring our battlefield to life a whole lot more. Now, let's put our Outriders and our ruins through their paces as we play Mission 4, in which we learn how models interact with ruins and the all-important morale phase. I've been Merlin. This has been Get Started. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.